Welcome to the Vertical Cafe podcast, where community connects through coffee and conversation. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Vertical Cafe podcast. I'm Ian Campbell, and to my left is Rod Profrock. And our guest today is Tami Treutlein. She is well known in the Warsaw community for the Spotlight Theater, as well as SLC Therapy, and maybe a lesser known business is the Pop It Up popcorn. I'm a popcorn enthusiast, so I was pretty excited to find that out about you. Tami studied at SUNY Geneseo.
Yep, that's how we wound up in Western New York.
Nice. And what was the name of the other school that you went to?
Adelphi. On Long Island.
Yes. Okay. I have an aunt from Long Island. That's pretty much where the crossover ends there. I don't know about Adelphi. Yeah, so lots of different businesses, like in a variety of fields. And my initial question for you is, what did you want to be when you grew up?
So in 7th grade, I wanted to be a marine biologist.
Nice.
And I even looked at colleges to become a marine biologist, did a whole summer internship marine biology camp school thing. And then I'm not sure what happens. And then I wanted to be a deaf education teacher. And so my mom worked at SUNY Farmingdale on Long Island. And she said, at the time it was a 2-year school, so probably equal to what GCC is now, but there wasn't a lot of 2-year only SUNY schools at that time. And she said, I have so many kids that come here that leave the college that they're at. Let's get a really good 2-year foundation. I'll get you the professors that I know, the students really love, all those sort of things, which, you're a teenager, you rail against, but I did what, my parents asked me to do. And, I was in my public speaking class, and the teacher there knew that I wanted to go into deaf education, and she was a speech pathologist. And she said, great idea. She said, but if you go for speech pathology, you can work in a school for deaf and be a deaf educator or do speech for kids with that are deaf. And if that doesn't work or you want to change, you can work with adults, you can work in a hospital, you can work at a school. It just gives you so many opportunities beyond that. So I said, okay, you know better than me, sounds good. And so I applied to become a speech pathologist, and then it was.
So what gave you the interest? Because that's pretty specific to work with the deaf. Was there something that drew you towards that?
I think I was obsessed with sign language. And so I had been going after school to become an interpreter to a couple classes. So I had done that. In the summers, I worked as a counselor at the Girl Scout camp on Long Island. And we went the last 2 weeks of camp. And there was called Friends Indeed. And so you were in high school and you were paired with someone else who was either your age or younger who had some sort of challenge, whether it was a motor challenge, a learning disability, and everything in between. And so you were their buddy for that 2 weeks so that they could do camp like everybody else. So I just kind of got sucked right up into that. So
Gotcha. Now, speaking of your childhood, if we can just kind of go back. So something interesting that I found out about you, and I'm not quite sure if everybody knows this, but you were adopted, correct?
I am, yeah.
Okay.
And I'm pretty vocal about it too.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was adopted when I didn't find out till I was 46 months old. I guess it never dawned on me. I just assumed I came and went. But my parents, my whole life, they said, it's not like they told me every day, but they told me enough until I understood what it meant. And I had this great book that I still have on my bookshelf called Why Was I Adopted? And it just said, it just means you're doubly loved. It wasn't this thing that you hid. It was this thing that made you that much more of because you had that many more people in your corner, whether or not you got to see them all or not. Sure. So I'm adopted. I grew up on Long Island in Massapequa on the South Shore and lived there my whole life and until college for my master's when I was in Geneseo.
Wow. Now, any siblings or were you the only child?
I was an only child. Yeah. Wow. So, and overprotective parents, but I was this package that they didn't want to lose or break or anything. And so I think they were that much more protective of. But because I was an only child, because I was a girl, probably the reason why I have so many businesses, my parents, and especially my dad, made sure that I knew how to do everything. Like I wasn't going to be less of because I was a girl. So, I was 16 and changing the tires on the car in case I had a flat. I was checking the oil. I was, doing everything that you wouldn't expect in the 80s that, a girl would normally do, but I could do it all. There was no difference. I was pushing the lawnmower, but I was also, helping with dinner and vacuuming and all that stuff. Yeah. So, I kind of went into the world and didn't know that no was ever an option, and not because I was stuck up and no was never an option, because like, well, let's work on this together. There's a way to go around it. There's a way to discuss it. There's a way to do it. So that's kind of how I was raised.
Yeah. I like that you tie it back to your parents, because I think that is an example of agency, and that's something that I don't know if it's cultural or maybe automatic, but you just feel like you can't do things maybe when you're a kid, and then that becomes a learned behavior. And so to tie it to the parents is like, you can play a role in communicating that to your kids and give them the gift of agency, which then leads to, like you tied it to multiple business ownership. Like it really can be anything. You could be exceptional in any field with the idea that you can solve a problem. I wanted to clarify about the Adelphi school. Were you going there specifically because you were moving back, or was that where you went initially?
So I did 2 years at SUNY Farmingdale, and then I applied to a 4-year program to finish up in communicative sciences and disorders is the official title for.
I saw that on your Facebook page.
Okay,
I was interested.
Perfect.
I'm interested in communication. So
okay, yeah. So it's called communicative sciences and disorders, and so they had a 4-year bachelor's program. So I applied there. Met 2 amazing best friends that also transferred in. The one girl also went to Farmingdale, was in that same public speaking class. So we just did that. So we finished, when you transfer, when it's not your major, it takes you like an extra semester to take all your background courses. So we finished after 2.5 years, and then applied to a master's program. And all of us had lived at home our whole lives and said, if we get an away option, like, let's go. And so I did, and off I went to Geneseo.
Nice. What was that like, shifting from Long Island life to SUNY Geneseo life?
Well, okay. So it wasn't that bad. I think I'm pretty adaptable in general. It was weird because everyone I knew in undergraduate, I lived at home and went to 2 commuter schools. And even though at Adelphi I had joined a sorority, there were no sorority houses, like not the true thing as you think. There were fraternities, there were sororities, but there were no houses on campus because it was a 75% commuter school. But when you went, you assume, I have this dorm, I'm going to have this, I'm going to have that. And when I went to Geneseo, they're like, you're a graduate student. There is none of that. I'm like, what do you mean there is none of that? So a little bit of adjustment period, learning to, how do I get houses? So I moved in with 4 people, and it was like my first time on my own and setting up, a room. And we were always a family that ate dinner at the same time every night, made a full meal kind of thing. So I made meals and, saved them and had them all during the week, and just try to move some of that stuff on. But it also, at that point, it was the late 90s, and there was no social media. You just kind of stayed in your place, and Geneseo has everything, right? And I have dated my husband since we've been in high school. He was graduating the year we met. We met the last month of his high school, and we dated all through college. And at that point, he was in medical school. So the hardest thing about being in Geneseo was he was in Grenada finishing up medical school. And so I was working 2 to 3 jobs to pay a phone bill because it cost 63 cents a minute.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you had to time it. You couldn't, or our only other choice was to get on like an AOL chat room and type back and forth and wait for the person to respond. So, I don't know, like the world wasn't as big as it was now.
Sure.
You didn't know, your options are what was around you, and that was that.
Yeah. So, I guess I'm not super familiar with life on Long Island, but did you go to the city a lot, or were you far enough away that you had your own community there on the island?
I didn't go as much as other people I know. We went consistently enough to see like at least 2, maybe 3 Broadway shows, probably more like 2 Broadway shows a year. We would go in to do that. We had exchange students once or twice. So we'd take them in for holidays that were specific with maybe, like a lot of our exchange students were for Sweden. And so their consulate would have or a local church would have an event at Christmas that was specific to what would happen in Sweden. So we'd go in for that kind of stuff.
Cool.
But yeah, it's you jump on the Long Island Railroad, take the train in. Now when we go back, my in-laws are still in Massapequa Park, and we'll take the kids all the time.
Yeah.
It doesn't, I love the city to visit.
Yeah.
And I love, so we went from, I came back home and I worked a year, and then we got married, and my husband's residency got him up here. It's how we wound up in Buffalo. And so we lived in Buffalo. And when we came, it was always all right, Buffalo's like a small Long Island at the time, where instead of 5 of everything, there's 1 of everything. And I only need 1 of everything. So this is great. Other than everyone drives way slower than they do on Long Island.
Yeah.
That was an adjustment period.
Yeah.
And then we moved out to here. And I will say it took about 9 months to adjust to living in Wyoming County, in that everything's a half hour to 45 minutes away. And we knew no one. Everyone here knows everybody. Now I feel like I know enough people.
Yeah.
And my parents kept telling me, don't worry, we met all our friends. When your kids go to school, well, okay, great. But my kids are just born and 2 years old. So, so it was an adjustment period for a bit, but I would not trade Wyoming County for anything.
Yeah.
So how long have you been here?
We have been here for 21 years.
21 years. Okay.
Yeah.
And you said you met Scott. That was going to be one of my questions. So you met Scott, your high school sweethearts.
Yes, we met on June 10th in 1991.
Does he remember that date?
That's what I was
He
gonna
remembers. He remembers not the date, but he remembers the day. We were on a Girl Scout, Boy Scout whitewater rafting trip, and he dumped a full bucket of water on my head.
Oh, wow.
When he
Okay.
fell out of his raft, and was in hours before he jumped out, and then asked to sit next to me on the bus ride home. Yeah.
And you said,
And I said,
Of course.
heck yeah. And I also bought a strawberry milkshake, which was my first strawberry milkshake
Oh,
at the
wow.
Burger King we're at, because I saw that he bought one and I wanted to have something in common.
Nice.
And then again, it was the early 90s. And so that was it. And I was like, does he even know my last name? There's no Snapchat and there's
Right.
no Facebook. And he called and I was like, how'd you figure it out? He's like, I opened the phone book and a map and figured out which last name matched up. Okay, great. So welcome to the early 90s.
so you had to work a little bit harder
You had to
in your
work way
relationships.
harder.
Yeah.
Wait, how do you feel about that? Do you think that with the technology we have, social media we have, is it a detriment to relationships? Because your story isn't common. High school sweethearts that last. And how long have you been married?
25 years this year.
25 years. So congratulations.
Thank you.
So a lot of marriages don't sustain that long. What do you think it is? And do you see a difference in how you can just hop on with the way you can communicate now with relationships? Is it a good thing to have Snapchat and to have all this social media available at our fingertips?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. So I have 4 children, right? So they're all just about to have birthdays. So they're 22, 20, 18, and 16, give or take by a month, because one hasn't had their birthday yet. In case you're listening, I know you haven't had your birthday yet, Paige. So my older 2 didn't have anything until a certain age, and then we slowly ramped younger and younger with my other ones, just because it changed, just because to stay connected with their teams at school, there was a group, so then you had to be on Snapchat when you were whatever age. I look at my one son's relationship, and I think it's too easy. I think it's easy for people to pick up on mistakes that would not have been as big a deal, but now 20 other people have seen the mistake, and so there's no discussion about it. I think I am always amazed. For example, someone just sent me something in the mail, and before it got there, I literally had so many ads, and I wasn't the one who said it out loud. Someone sent it to me. And when it came, I was like, oh, I was just seeing this all over TikTok and Facebook or like how, like, it's just weird. And I feel like for kids in relationships and even young adults in relationships, as soon as they're thinking or saying, like, you know, they want to be anonymous. So they're saying, you know, how do you deal with blah, blah, blah. And now everything's showing you that problem over and over again. So it's like, oh, this must be a problem. And if you pick the wrong people to follow what their answer is, like, it's no longer what you're thinking or a discussion or, you know, like, hey, maybe we've lucked out. You know, people say we're crazy. We do lots of travel with our kids for sports and stuff. But those car rides, I think, of what made my kids sane because we're not face to face. So there's this anonymity of both of you facing forward, but you get to approach these subjects that normally would feel weird if your mom's looking right at you and you have to ask the question. And so it's kind of given us this chance to go back and forth. And we've had discussions with some of them that say, like, yeah, you know, I really probably need to put a timer on my Snapchat. It affects me. And so I know that it makes it that much harder to be in a relationship because 500 people are going to know about it. There's just, I don't know. It seems so much harder.
Yeah.
You know, my husband would write a love letter on a note and I would get it the next day.
I'm sorry. We were just talking about that this morning because he's a homeschooler, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. But for whatever reason, homeschoolers are always taught to write in cursive still. Mm-hmm. And so when it comes to, you know,
legibility of handwriting.
Yes. It's not always that great. So actually, and that got us on the conversation of, you know, back in the day, you know, we used to write letters. And so it was kind of...
It's more intimate, right?
Yeah, more intimate. You have to take your time. I mean, you could do the same thing, I guess, on your phone, but there's just something different about it, I think. And it could be because we're just old. I don't know.
No, but I have this discussion all the time, like, oh, I've been talking to this person. And I literally say, out loud talking? Or do you mean sending messages?
Yeah.
No, just messages. All right, let me know when you've actually heard the person's voice, and then we can talk about it.
It occurs to me there's much more risk involved. Like even with your husband tracking you down in the phone book, there's like a high probability that you might not have picked up on the same vibes that he was thinking. And like he went through a lot of effort to do, like, oh, that's weird. Like, you know, putting so much effort into finding me. But so there's a risk there. But then also the effort that you have to put in to find you and reconnect is sort of like, it's a good proxy for, you know, like you're looking for a suitable mate and, well, this guy knows how to figure out a problem. I like figuring out problems, you know? So
right.
There's value in a barrier to entry. But I was really interested in the idea that we were talking about with the letter writing, that it's more intimate. And of course, like nobody else is going to see what's in the letter theoretically, unless you like show it to everybody. But then what you were saying is sort of the opposite of that with social media being a problem. And it's like, of course it's a problem. There's a lack of intimacy because everything that is between you and this person is then sort of like, at least in some way, broadcast. And so, yeah, it feels to me like that would lead to not intimate relationships because if you're having it sort of with this one person and 500 other people, like, you know, that's not normal. Or like,
these people look so happy and this person didn't do these 5 things for me. So that means I'm not happy now because they didn't do the same thing. You know, it's it's interesting. But I think it takes, we let our kids use a lot of social media and we're old and tired. So our younger ones get a lot more. And the older one, I said, you know, thank your older siblings because they have beat us down so that we're more willing, you know, this would never go at this age.
Yeah. I feel you, Tammy. I understand completely. Yeah. The younger ones, you seem to like, okay, I've had enough. I waved the white flag. Yeah. You know?
Yeah.
But yeah. It's tough. Yeah.
I was wondering what kind of therapy it is that you do at SLC Therapy. And also, maybe to start, how long has that business been open? How long have you been practicing?
So it has been open since 2001. So also I opened it a year after we got married. My goal, we'll rewind 500 steps. So when I was at Geneseo, and I had done a lot with my undergrad. I knew that my specialty I wanted to be was autism. And so in the summers, I worked at special ed schools. I worked at a camp for kids that we took for 6 weeks as a resident in program. And I knew that I got it. I like figuring out little nuances and things. And I just click really well with a person who also has autism. I see the oddities they see, where they can pick up the tiniest speck on the floor or something off in a pattern. That's me. I can look at a thing and find the exact letter you need in 0.10 seconds in a word search. So I get them. So when I went to Geneseo, I also concurrently did a fellowship at U of R at the Kirsch Center. And it wasn't like a full degree program. It was a certificate. And you're specializing in, I guess, anybody with autism, but specifically children, because that's what I was looking for. So I had done that, and I went back to Long Island, and I worked at a school that the only kids that went there had autism, either from like a super, super young age all the way up. And I had my plan. My supervisor was planning to retire after so much, time. And even though there were like 5 other therapists in the one area, like I knew I was going to take her spot. Like I had this whole plan. I worked on all the background stuff you'd work on with kids with autism, with like visual schedules and setting up their classroom environment and just making it really productive for everybody, and ran internships. And then when someone's going into the medical field for their residency, you don't get a choice per se. You interview at a whole bunch of places and you rank your choices. And then said places rank the people they interviewed. And then a computer somewhere more smarter than us, I guess, like matches where you go. So Scott had interviewed at SUNY Buffalo, or I guess UB, and that's where he wound up matching. So and it's a day where like now there's these big opening your envelope and everybody in front of each other. It was a computer. So literally on my lunch break, he was hitting like reset, to keep making the screen go so we could know where we're going. So like up, and so then we were just going. And so we came up here, and there's some really great, there really isn't a program that isn't good, but there's some great programs. But it was different, right? I was used to what we did on Long Island, and no matter where I was going to get a job up here, it had a home component of early intervention, which is therapy for children birth through 3. And not so much preschool. It was mostly just the birth to 3 components. First place I interviewed at, there was like a lot of rigid rules in all the places I interviewed. So the one place that no matter how much experience you were coming in, if you're the first foot in the door, everybody gets this no matter what. And the U of R hospital, Strong had called and were like, no, like let her, she can train your staff. Like you don't have to bring us in. Like we trained her. Now you don't have to like pay for us to come out. Didn't matter. And I was like, okay, I can't do this. So I wound up working for a really wonderful place called Heritage Centers. And it wasn't where I wanted to be. And you still had to do the home component. So I was doing some additional home therapy through another company. And I just wanted to get rid of some of the things that made people unhappy in their day to day. So like TAs could come in sweatpants, but you couldn't wear jeans. And I'm going into dry clean only pants on floors that are sticky. And I'm like washing just things that didn't make sense. Mm-hmm. Like why are we making a rule about what people are wearing as long as it looks neat and clean? And the therapy's happening and it's happening well. So I wanted to get rid of some of that. And I started to understand that everybody's working, like we all work because we want to have like a great life with our family, right? Like I don't know, not everybody would show up to what they do every day, if they could just be home and like traveling with their family and doing whatever. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to love where I worked so that the money I was bringing home had me love what I was doing when I was home as well and being fulfilled. So after about a year, I applied to Erie County to become an agency and got told no. And I was like, oh, well, I don't think no really exists, but like, okay, I'll try again. So like I wrote again 3 months later and I wrote again, and it just, I just asked for clarification, like why, all this kind of thing. And 3 of us had gotten in, and we were like the first 3 agencies in, like, I don't know, 12 years or whatever number it was at that time. And so I kind of created a agency for therapists by therapists, and I wanted to make sure that all of us that were there, that we were doing what we were asking them to do. So if I'm asking you to stay an extra 5 minutes, I'm also staying at 5 minutes, and I get what that means. If I'm asking you to do an extra paperwork because the state told you we have to submit an extra paperwork, I get what that time investment is. So that's how, so it started out with just me and 2 friends part-time. And so we did birth through 5, which is early intervention, and we did preschool services, which is 3 through 5. And then we added on an OT, occupational therapy component, following all the fun stuff you have to do in New York State to add that stuff in. Mm-hmm. And then we added physical therapy, and we already had special education services at that point. So now we average about 30 therapists that work for us at any one time. And we do birth through 5, so early intervention preschool in Erie County, Niagara County, Wyoming County, Genesee County. We've done some Chautauqua, but based on where people live, what makes the most sense.
That's awesome. And so is it mostly, I don't know what you would call it, but like outpatient, like you go to people,
yes.
Or where's the therapy taking place?
Yeah, so we do have a home base in West Seneca, but except for during COVID times, therapy really doesn't happen there. So we'll go to the person's home, grandma's house, daycare, school, wherever the child is, that's where we go. If the family is typically home, but it's not the best environments, we've done therapy at McDonald's playgrounds, the local park, kind of whatever we need to do. We've done at the libraries, most of the time it's in whatever that kid's most usual natural environment.
Another question is, so is it speech therapy, or like I was also wondering what occupational therapy means, because I was thinking like for a job, and I was like, wait, no, it's for kids, right? So
yeah, so it is speech therapy. So some of our kids are not talking at all, or there's a disorder to their language. So it might just be the articulation component, how they make certain sounds. It's not following the typical pattern of language development. So that's usually our 2 speech parts. Occupational therapy, it is, because it does have the word occupation. So it's the things you need to do to be successful in your day-to-day daily tasks.
So maybe for school then?
Yeah, for school, or even if we have a child with cerebral palsy or something else, it might be like adapting their spoon to be a little bit wider because they can't hold on to that narrow metal part. And so putting some sort of adaptive piece on it so they can do it, or looking at, when they do that, can they scoop in and get it all the way to their mouth so that they can learn to self-feed themselves, things like that. And it comes to like the fine motor tasks of your finger, of how you're grasping different items. So things that you do when you're young that thereby make you maybe a better writer or not so great writer down the road. And then my occupational therapists also are looking at some of the gross motor components. So like how you sit and what your trunk support is your ability. So if I don't have good support here, I can't independently use my arms, so, are the kids propping on a table and now they only have use of one hand, and now it's, and so they're tiring, things like that. So yeah, there's a lot we look at.
There's a lot. Yeah. So how do your clients, where do they come from? How do they get involved with your organization? Are you contracted through schools, through the county, through the state? How do they get involved?
It's changed over time, but now early intervention, you are contracted with New York State first, and then you tell them what counties you work in. Each county works differently. So in Erie County, you can only work as a therapist if you're through an agency. And that's because that's just their rule. In Wyoming County, you could be through an agency, or you can have an independent contract with that county. So state approves you first, and then you go, and this is birth through 3. And so some places, the service coordinators who are overseeing these cases will call you and say, hey, I have a kid in Warsaw who needs speech twice a week. Do you have availability? Parents are home Monday, Wednesday, Friday in the afternoons. And you can say yes or no, or I have a therapist that fits that need. In Erie County, there's about 24 agencies that do what we do. And so a lot of times it's an email blast that just says child identification number C3, blah, 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 whatever it means for them so they know who it belongs to. And they'll tell you the zip code, parents' availability. And then sometimes they'll say, this child has sensory issues so that you need to maybe tailor who the therapist is that's going in there. And then for the preschool level, your contract is with the county first, but based on the school's testing, they decide what a child needs, and then they're responsible for finding an agency that can then pick up the kid. We do contract with schools. So if a school district has someone going out on maternity leave or they have someone retired, they have a hole that fills, we have filled in for quite a few districts in Erie and Wyoming County.
So you said you do have some private consultations with families and children?
We do, for the most part. Most of it's only through early intervention. I would say like 97% of our business is through early intervention and preschool services. And then if a child doesn't qualify for services over the summer, but they still want their kids still to get stuff, sometimes they'll private pay, and then they'll bill their insurance.
So so somebody's able to call your agency without going through a school or early intervention and say, I need some help. I need some services, and you're able to set up that, right?
Yes.
Correct?
Yeah, we have done that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. It's good to know.
Good to know. There are bigger agencies that do it on a more consistent basis where they have people come in, and that's like why we have certain spots in our office set up for things like that. But for the most part, we're going through a school district first.
You are? Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Very good. So this is just one of the 5 businesses
It is.
that you are running.
Yes.
So I just need to know. So you have 4 kids. What are the ages again?
22, 20, 18, 16.
Okay. And you've been married for 25 years.
Yep.
Your husband is a doctor, gynecologist,
Yep.
correct?
OBGYN. Yep.
And when do you guys find time alone? Like, how does this all work?
I think it probably was harder years ago when the kids were younger, but we've always made the time. Like, I think when we went to pre-Cana classes, so we're Roman Catholics, so you go to pre-Cana classes before you get married, if you're going to get married in the church. And I remember one of the couples saying, like, if you don't make the time now, you're not going to magically have the time because they grew up or they went off to college and now it's an empty nest. And then I had heard years ago about, like, if you don't do what you love now, you're definitely not going to do it retired because you might be out of it. You haven't just learned to make that time. So we might not have been great at it, but we were always good about making the time of getting a babysitter so that we could get out and have a date night at least once a month or something. We lucked out when the kids were younger. My parents were really great because I was an only child when I was pregnant with my second child. They put their house for sale in Long Island and moved up here. So now they're about an hour away from us because we came out at the time we were in Buffalo, so they were 15 minutes away. Now they're an hour. But we had that at an early age.
Okay, that's good.
So that super helped.
So you had to be intentional.
Yes, very intentional.
Yes.
And I'm intentional too with, like, even outside of my marriage, if I have a hobby, like, I'm an avid scrapbooker, like huge scrapbooker. And, 2-3 times a year, I will go scrapbook for a weekend with my friends. And is it hard to fit in when I've already done like 3 soccer tournament weekends and a weekend away at a convention and another weekend away, which means it's another week my floors aren't going to get mopped. And I just do it because if I don't do it now, it's so easy not to have that for down the road.
Yeah. So you have a lot happening.
We have a lot happening. Yes.
So you go from the therapy to cinemas, movie theaters. Now, how does that work? How did you get involved with that?
So I was running my practice out in Buffalo, and people thought I was crazy commuting, but on Long Island, even if something's the next town over, it can take you 40 minutes to get there. So driving was just a way of life of what I grew up on. And so I didn't think, and I was like, this is great. Like, most I'm going to bump into is a tractor, you know, like, and it might delay me by 5 minutes. Like I laugh when people are like, oh, Buffalo traffic. I'm like, you have no idea. Now I get annoyed about Buffalo traffic, but I get it.
Wyoming County is a blessing. The worst you get is like a red light that has no reason to be red for you. Like, but exactly. No cars, never a car.
No cars. So, so we were doing that. And when we moved down here, my husband opened his practice. So we were running his practice, and we were, running basically my practice up there. And my kids were little. And like you said, how do you get anywhere? And because he's an OBGYN and you can't be more than 30 minutes for a hospital when you're on call. When the kids got to the age that we would do stuff, at that point, there was a 2.5-year period where he was the only OBGYN in the entire county. So I could get places, but he could not get places. So we weren't taking them to the city to do anything, because then on his days that he wasn't on call at the hospital, like you just didn't go anywhere because you were tired. So the theater was closing for the 3rd time. And I said to my husband, I think they're just not running it like a business. Like, I'm sure as you're well aware, having the cafe, like this can be your passion. Like, why you created this space, but there's also a business part of it that you have to be intentional about. And so I said, why don't we put in a bid? And he said no. And I said, okay. And then he called me, he's like, why don't we put in a bid? And I said no. And then we went back and forth. And then I called and I was like, you know what? I think you're right. We shouldn't do it. And he goes, too late. I already put in the bid. So we won the bid. It was on tax foreclosure. Okay. And at the time I was doing, I like to learn. I was doing another fellowship at UB at the Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership. So I'm in a class with 50 other people who either are running a small business, like maybe a quarter of them weren't the people who started the business, but they took it over. And the rest of us had, built it, or it was a family business, multi-generation. So I'm on this retreat for that when we're going back and forth. And I was like, all right, we're going to do this. Like, what a great place. I'm at a place that has you do, business plan and teach you background and all that knowledge you missed. So, I don't know. No. So we get this business, we get it in October. And so I call a friend who's doing in-house kind of movie theaters and was like, hey, what do you know? And he's like, doesn't really translate, but I'll help you through it. And at the time, the secretary at my speech practice, her son's best friend's father still owns Dipson Theaters in Buffalo. And she said, let me message him and see if he'll give you a call. And he was like, sure, have her call. So Mike Clement was invaluable. At the time, everything had just transitioned from traditional film to digital, which this was not digital here in Warsaw. And he's like, I actually have a digital projector sitting on my floor that we just pulled out of another location. Like, I'll sell it to you. And here's what you do to book movies. And here's our movie booker. And he hooked me up with everybody. We could not have done that without him. And I was like, okay. So I called the people and they're like, all right, we'll get you on the list. It'll be about 6 months. And I was like, I don't think you understand. Like, we open in 6 weeks. I just booked Frozen. And they were like, that's not how it works. And I was like, I don't think you understand. I booked Frozen. We're opening Thanksgiving weekend. And so I convinced people to not do stuff the traditional way. Like, let's get this going. So we opened the theater, and we opened it with the understanding that this was our community service project. We just wanted it to break even. Sure. We figured, as a family with 2 incomes, 2 cars, and we weren't taking the time to go up and pay prices in the city and take that drive, when half of my kids' classmates were living on a 1-car, 1-income family, like, they weren't going to get that opportunity. So we just, we got the community involved. People came and they helped us paint the whole place and just get it up and going. And then in April, there's a big convention of all the National Association of Theater Owners. Also goes by NATO, but not the NATO that everyone thinks. They have a big conference in Las Vegas, and we, went, and it was fun because it's Hollywood. And we were like, this is a numbers game, right? So, and as it comes down to business, so we did the recreate, and the principal here in Warsaw at the time was like, you should come down to Hornell and do that there. The theater's been closed for 3 years, like same kind of situation. Steuben County tends to be like one of the poorest counties in New York State. So no one's really traveling, you should see. So we called the mayor down there and walked through with flashlights, and that one was under real estate foreclosure. And, worked with a couple of people. Senator Gillibrand at the time helped kind of get FDIC to get this going because it had been sitting for such a long time, and get the auction going. And so we did that, and we were like, okay, great. Like, we did our thing, and if they break even or, sustain themselves to save enough in the bank so when we have to replace stuff, we're good. And we just left it as is for like 10 years. And then someone who had theaters maybe 40 minutes away in either direction from Hornell, we had met. So when we went to the yearly conference, and he helped us get seats from one location, and called like a year later and was like, hey, I really need out of these theaters. Do you think you might be willing to take them over? He had sold one to a manager in Dunkirk, and he still had 2 left. And so it was post-COVID, and, we were all closed. There were Hollywood strikes and writer strikes that we weren't expecting and all that stuff. And we were able to, come to some good deals with the landlord to take over the space and whatnot. So we went from having 2-3 screens to now 4 locations. The 2 new ones have 8 screens. So made our own little Western New York. Well, I guess one's near Albany. So New York circuit of movie theaters. So
yeah.
And then during COVID, before we had these other theaters, we were like, oh, we got to do something more with the space. So then we started our gourmet popcorn line that we were talking to before the podcast started. And because we were just trying to think business-wise, like, what else can you do with this space? And we already know how to make popcorn. Can we make gourmet popcorn? So got in the equipment you needed to specialize in it. Went for National Caramel Day to Chicago to learn how to make different flavors of popcorn and whatnot with gold medal. And started a popcorn line. So
that excites you, doesn't it?
It does.
You
yes.
really like
I
that
really
popcorn.
like popcorn. Yeah.
I do too. I could eat it all day.
Have you ever been to the Thousand Islands, like at all?
I have been once, yes.
They have Nav's popcorn up there, and I think Nav's has started selling like I see them do retail in more places, but it's very good. And also, growing up, we had a thing called Canal Town Days, or maybe like it was like a festival in Palmyra, and that was one of my favorite places to go. I think my grandpa somehow knew the guy from the state fair, but anyway, like kettle corn, very good.
Kettle corn.
I like just plain popcorn too because
is there any
healthy.
nutritional value in popcorn?
No, but you aren't eating something with negative, like too many calories and
because it's coconut oil.
Yep.
That we pop it in. Most places, some places don't. But we use true coconut oil. And there's 2 different types of popcorn seed that we use depending on whether it's going to be gourmet or regular. So maybe like the flavor call stuff that you put on top that gives it that little extra yellow color, and the salt. But I mean, I wouldn't say I'd eat a whole lot of butter. If you see the TikToks where people put the straws in to get the butter in, we don't have a self-serve butter, so you don't have to do that because we'll do that for you. Yeah. I feel like that's probably the unhealthy part of it. Yeah. But
where did the relationship between popcorn and movies come? How did that happen?
I can help you with this.
Yes.
Okay. So popcorn was always sold outside the theater. No food was allowed in over time, and then savvy business people saw it happening. And so then they started letting it come in, and then they took over concessions, and it changed the whole thing. But you never went because you went as a community to go and get the news. And there was a serious part with a fun part, all together. But yeah, it started like street vendors outside the movie theater, and then it just worked its way in.
And concessions is a big part of the business.
It's pretty much the only part that we can control. So the better a movie does, the more I owe to the movie studio. So opposite relation, like, how like, oh, you buy 12 of something and you get a discount. No, if 12 of you show up, I have to pay more. It's an opposite. And so our percentage that we owe at a minimum is usually 50%. And those are for like art house movies or something that's been out. If I don't get something on an opening week, then I have a chance for it being 50%. Otherwise, I'm paying a minimum of 60 to 64% of your ticket price to the studios. So I lose that right off the bat. So concessions is honestly why concessions are so high at most movie theaters. It's where we make our money to make up the difference, to keep our lights on. Because let me tell you, those projectors cost a lot of money to run and keep cool. So,
and you guys are doing well. I mean, you've been here in Warsaw Spotlight Theater how long now? 10 years?
Yeah, we opened in 2013, so a little more.
So it's doing well.
It's doing well.
It's sustaining itself.
It's sustaining itself. I was going to say, it's why I still have to work at every other job. And Warsaw will never be our paycheck of any sorts. But we hoped with taking on 2 more that maybe it might make something a little bit more sustainable and, be a job of sorts.
So out of all the things that you're involved with, if you could choose, would it be the theater? If you could give up the other stuff, the other practice you got going on?
No, I probably still would do all of them.
You would do it all.
I would. I am happy that I'm not on a consistent basis on the floor having a full caseload of kids. I don't think I could at my age consistently do that. But I love it. I love, I still have parents on friends on Facebook and they were like, do you remember when this kid didn't even talk? And now the kid's 26 and a cop for one of the, whatever. Yeah. I think there's very few things in life that you get to see that correlation. So maybe it happens sometimes in the medical field, but that comes with some really low points too. There's really nothing very low about what I do for my job. It's one-on-one. It's, we're there for this magical half hour, 2 magical half hours a week. And it's giving the parents the tools they need to make everything so successful. And so it's just, it's a lot of fun. And to me, back to that working with kids with autism, but in early intervention, that's not usually the kids I have. It's still a puzzle, why isn't this kid talking? Is it anatomical? Is it, something that are just not understanding in that back and forth reciprocal process? What is it that's missing? So that part of it's a lot fun. Now that I do all the administrative stuff, I really love teaching the new people who are out. There's value in me starting my career when I didn't have kids and I wasn't married and then was married and seeing them not understand the things that they're missing. Why does this mom just da-da-da? I'm like, let me tell you what that mom did when you left the house, So there's just, I don't know, there's so good stuff. And then, the movie theater is just fun.
Yeah.
I think probably what sealed the deal is when we first bought this theater, it was a 1-screen, 500 seat, and it had the full stage. And for that first month that we had Frozen, my kids laid on the stage looking straight up and watched the screen. And they just had so much fun. Yeah. So that's ingrained. And even now when the whole industry is still on a coming back phase, and we're not anywhere, well, we're really close to where we were. We're getting there. I still, love it day to day. Do I love the part that I own it and have to take all the headaches of that part? Maybe not so much, but I love the industry.
Yeah. And you travel a lot. So,
I do.
Right. So how many places have you been? How many countries have you been? States have you been? Because I know, didn't you just go to the Olympics?
We did.
Right? Okay.
So we took our kids on 2 cross-country RV trips and did 2 big loops. So we took them all the way out to Colorado and down to Utah and then, down and then followed Route 66 all the way back. So we did that. That's for cool. A 2-week stint. And then 2 summers later, we did it again, but did it one. So we did 80 out last time. This time we did 90 all the way out and did the top loop because we wanted to get a little bit further. So we got as far as, well, kind of some of the same states, maybe Idaho, the right edge of Idaho, so we could get into Yellowstone. And so we've done that loop. So we've been a bunch of those. There's very few states I haven't been in. We've been we have a couple to track down. Not too many. I don't think I've been to Alabama, that kind of stuff. So we've got that to do. And then I've taken my Girl Scout troop on a 7-country, 15-day loop. And then last year, someone that I knew through the movie industry who's no longer in it had extra tickets to the Olympics, and had put out, would anyone, like to purchase these extra things? So we booked a 2-week trip around that and stayed at Airbnbs. And we did a couple extra countries because we had an exchange student. So we went to visit his family in Germany. And then my husband and my 2 sons had never been over there. So we did a couple of extra countries. So yeah.
And is Scott's position, is it flexible? Is he?
He is. So we wound up, after we spent so many years of being the only person and not being able to go anywhere with the kids, we sold his practice to Batavia Hospital, UMMC, who got bought out by Rochester Regional. And, businesses had to pivot and change after COVID. And so it didn't fit our family very well. So now he's what's called a hospitalist. And so he goes into hospitals and he stays for a 24-hour shift. And so he does, anywhere from 5 to 8, depending on the month or whatnot of those. But when he's home, he's home. Where before, anytime the phone rang, like after a while, we all were like my husband and I were having PST with the phone because it would go off and like, is it the hot, like even when it wasn't it, like all night he's sleeping and like his phone making noise and like his body would jerk because it just weighs on you, and it was a lot of stress. So yeah, so now because of that, he can, do bulk load all his shifts earlier, and then that gives us a chance to do a little bit more travel.
You seem to handle stress really well.
I do.
I can't see you having all these businesses and everything that goes on, the 4 children and the traveling and the Girl Scouts and the sports. How do you process all this and still be able to go to bed at night peacefully?
I think there are times that I don't handle it amazingly, and I know I'm not handling amazingly. So like sometimes I'm that person that pulls into the driveway and I don't get out of my car for 20 minutes. I'm like on TikTok or something just to decompress. And I think that's me gaining back the control of my environments. I do try to consistently, like we have like a infrared sauna of sorts. I have an autoimmune condition, so I use that. And so I really try to make sure, like, am I doing all the right things for my health? And just take that 20 minutes in the morning. I have some really great friends who own businesses that will call me out if I haven't done enough for myself. Last year, we made a commitment that like every Tuesday we were hiking. And like, it's a lot when you have a business to make sure, it doesn't sound like much, but when you're trying to like achieve every single mile of Letchworth State Park, when you only have time to do 2 or 3 miles a week, but like, and then there's a drive and that. So like, back to that conversation we had earlier of just carving out that time of what you need and like not going back on yourself. When I was in that class with the other entrepreneurs, somebody said like, if you were an insurance agent and you're sitting there with your number 2 client and your number 1 client walks in the door, would you say to your number 2 client, I'm sorry, you have to go? Like, you wouldn't do that to them. And just because that person walked in, they're like, why, you are that number 2 client. Why are you treating yourself any differently just because something else popped up? So I really, really try to make sure that, I value myself as much. I don't always do a great job of it. I know I take on a lot more than most people do. But I try to make sure I can handle it before.
Yeah,
but I do have a hard time saying no. I've gotten much better at saying no to like groups or helping or whatnot. I just feel like if you have the time or you have the ability or you have the money, you need to share that with everybody.
Sure. Yeah.
So I really try to do that as much as possible. But I do try. And like I said, people will call me out like, okay, have you said yes to too many things and what can you get rid of? I'm like, all right, let me get to the end of this project and then I'll tell them I'm done.
Yeah. I was thinking that I just thought it was so cool that you would take your desire to get into small business and use it as best as you could for your community, because obviously small businesses are a deeply ingrained part of small communities, but I don't know that it's as obvious to most people that they're so integral in like people's lives. So like movies are something that we all enjoy, but then if there is no movie theater in Warsaw, then people have to go to the city. So then the likelihood of them being able to get to go to the theater goes way down. So just providing that simple thing is an act of service, like you mentioned, as your community service project. And so I think finding creative ways where somebody who wants to get into business can also do it as an act of service. I think that's a big part of Vertical here, is like providing a space for people to come together, to enjoy a cup of coffee, to relax on their lunch break, whatever it is. That's a big thing that Vertical provides. And it's good like for business, but it's also good for the people around. So anyway, just I was thinking that that the way that you invest in your community also, it comes back and helps you kind of invest in yourself too. Like it doesn't start initially selfish, but it ends up being beneficial to you and your family.
Very much, yeah.
The community takes care of you as much as you take care of it, I guess, something like that.
Yeah, very true, very true.
And Tami, we're going to wrap up here, but so speaking of community, you are involved in the community.
Yes.
Your husband once was the mayor, Scott,
He was,
right?
he was.
And how was that run? Did he enjoy that? Did you guys, out of all the other stuff that you do, you know what? Why don't I become the mayor? Let's just put ourselves out there even more. I mean, how was that?
It was interesting. It's funny because when we first moved here, I used to joke like someday I'm going to be the mayor. And it's funny that it worked out that he wound up being the mayor. Interestingly enough, the person who originally owned the theater when it was the Farman Theater was also a doctor and also was a mayor of the area. So I think maybe like there's a ghost there that does the right thing. I don't know. It just worked out when we were getting ready to have our third kid. He had to term out early because it just got to be too much. That was back when there was phone books and people could look up your numbers. Mm-hmm. So like getting a lot of phone calls about like, hey, can you help people consistently have their dog poop on the lawn and what can you do about that? Got to be a bit much, but it's interesting. I think everyone should get involved. Obviously Rod knows I do a lot with the Warsaw Chamber to help other businesses. And you do better when you lift each other, right? So what do they say? Like, rising tide rises all boats, and so I think there's just so much as a community that you can do. And even as a person, like, okay, so I'm listening to this podcast and I don't have a business and I don't have this, you still can like tell someone out loud when they're walking down the street, if you really like their outfit, that you love their outfit, because that might just be what they needed to get through the rest of their day. Like there's just always something great that you can do for somebody else in the smallest way that, does cost nothing but kindness. And I guess I'm just really lucky that my husband is okay with all the craziness that I take on. And I'm like, we're going to do this. And like, oh, by the way, I just volunteered you to help do X, Y, and Z. And he's just like,
so are your personalities similar or opposite?
Opposite. He'd prefer to stay home.
Yes.
He's not antisocial, but, if people invite him out, he goes out. But if nobody ever invited him out, he would never have a party for any good reason. Yeah, I think so. And I would like give away everything and he'd be like, what is going on here right now? But I think we complement each other.
So there's a healthy balance.
There's a healthy balance.
Good. And so as far as community goes, you are involved in all of those things. What do you want to see for the future of Warsaw, the village, and then also Wyoming County? Is there any visions you have or anything that you would like to see happen here?
I feel like I see that there's a huge community, right? Like supporting other community. Like I'm always amazed, example, your first podcast, right? Like how many people come out and support people who are struggling with medical things and whatnot and show up with meals and like that part, I feel like Wyoming County gets like the gold star on. We were brand new and I was here and I was on bed rest and my husband was going to church with my son by himself. And finally, like someone stopped him and was like, where's your wife? And he's like, she hasn't been able to get out of bed for whatever weeks. And then all of a sudden, like food showed up every day for like months and months. I'm like, people don't even know us, like literally don't know us, because we are barely here a couple of months. Like this place just has community. I wish that people understood that their words harm people really fast, and so I think it's so prevalent on social media to talk about the negative and what's wrong. And I'm just amazed at things that people are willing to put out there. And I just think and then people are like, oh, I was thinking that, like, it just spreads too easy. So I wish for how much we support each other, there's just way too much negativity. And maybe because there's less of us, you see it a little bit sharper. I think people, for the most part, do an okay job, with small business. I try to do as much as I can with small business, but I'm also like a obsessive Amazon shopper out of convenience, right? I'm busy, and so I don't always get. And so I found it interesting when we first moved here and nothing was open on Sundays. And I was like, oh, that's kind of like, okay, I have to get used to this. And then I really loved it. And then I was glad it didn't exist anymore. And now I don't necessarily miss it, but I wish people stop thinking that Wyoming County or Warsaw was so limiting. There's so much here, and we all could be open later and have more things so that people didn't need to go far if people remembered there's a bunch here. When we have the wine walks with Kiwanis and whatnot, to hear people come back and be like, I didn't know Warsaw had all this stuff. And I'm like, it's here. Like, people just have to look for it, and people don't. Like, people are quick on convenience. And I guess when I was younger, I didn't recognize that as much, but I do now realize that we need to get away from the convenience of everything, and like, I am thankful that you guys don't have a drive-through. I mean, I probably would be here way more if you did. So I'm in some ways like a drive-through would be nice.
Sure.
But like, that's not what you're about. You're not here for like the quick buck of coffee. You're here for that community, and people just need to see more of that. And I feel like it's coming back. It's just people need to support it just a tiny bit more.
Yeah. I think tourism is something that we miss out on. We're getting a lot of travelers. So something that we can do to capture them so that they stay here in Warsaw rather than just travel through. What can we do, and how do we do that? Do you have any ideas for that? I
think business owners around here need to be a little bit more specific. So what we haven't moved up in for a sign of the times is you can't just put a paper sign in your window and be like, be back in 30 minutes. Like, the consistency, like I am, and this is part of the reason why I do a lot of Amazon shopping. Like, if you're telling me you're going to be there and I've come for the third time and you're not, like, I don't have the time to fix it. And it's scary as a business owner to make changes in your company. So like, with the chamber, when I've given suggestions on way to get more people in, if we're having some sort of promotion thing, and people are like, great idea, but taking that next step is hard for people. I don't feel, for a while we were running a women's business group, just so that people could bounce ideas off each other. That part is missing. We have a great county chamber. We have a great Warsaw chamber, but that day-to-day needs, or like the support that people need to just do that little extra, I think would boost stuff. Because when people come here and they get told like, well, nothing's here. And they're right. When my people get out of the movie theater at night, there's no place for them to go.
Right.
Necessarily to keep them here, except for the days that Amber's open, but they're not open every day that we're open late.
Yeah.
And that used to be there. And that needs to come back in general.
I know. I've driven downtown, well, on
It's
Main
downtown.
Street, downtown. And, you see some of these travelers just wandering. They're looking for something, and there's really no place for them to go.
Yeah.
Something, a unique place. Like, I like East Aurora Main Street. I love it. You can just walk. There's different unique shops you can pop into and things like that. And I can see that here because the travelers are coming by and they're just driving through. But if they had places that they could walk into, that were very unique, and they can spend the night here and just walk around town. I don't know if that's feasible here in the small village of
I
Warsaw.
wish I could take Perry and Warsaw and merge them together.
Yeah.
Because I think Perry's missing the extra stuff to do.
Yeah.
But has some of those shops that stay open later.
Sure.
But if their Main Street and our Main Street could be merged together. It's funny because people are always sometimes worried about competition, but like if you talk to like some of the cider mills, like the hard cider, the more there are, the more people come.
Yeah.
It's actually better when we have more of the same thing, because then people are like, oh, I can go because I have all these choices. I have all that. I think, sometimes we get there and it goes down. I think I'm excited to see like what happens in the next 3 years. But as a small business, 3 years is a long time to wait for things to pick up.
Yeah. Last question.
Okay, last question.
Okay, this is it. Your husband's an OBGYN. Did he deliver your children?
He did not. They
didn't.
asked him. He was in residency when I had the first one. And he said, I just want to be dad and hold her hand.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's what he did.
That's awesome.
All right, very good. Okay.
It would be weird to be on the clock, I feel like, at that time.
Yeah, and if anything went wrong, all that kind of stuff. So just dad.
Gotcha.
That's great.
Well, Tami, we're grateful that you're able to stop in and
thank
take
you
some
for
time out
inviting
for us
me.
today. And
this is my favorite room. If no one's ever been, I come and I do my work. And sometimes I bring a table so I can do my work on a table. It's great.
yeah. Well, thanks for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.